Hello and welcome everybody to another wonderful Monday. Well, I guess it's afternoon for me, evening for most of you. So, you know, tomato. And speaking of it being mostly in the evening for everybody else, happy Valentine's Day. I hope you all are enjoying the wonderful dinners, either by yourself, kicking back, relaxing quietly with a movie or a good book, or those out there having dinner with loved ones. Either way, we hope you guys are having a wonderful Valentine's Day. And we're excited, Vincent and I, to bring you another episode of kind of our publishing tips series here, where we're talking about the different forms of publishing during February. So last week, we talked about the differences between kind of traditional publishing versus self-publishing with best-selling author Angela R. Watts. Great video. If you guys missed that, be sure to go up. It'll be tagged in the right-hand corner over here after the stream. So definitely go and check that out. She had some wonderful insights and advice that I think everybody can take away from. Tonight, specifically, we're going to tackle crowdfunding. Now, crowdfunding your book is actually a fairly new concept that has only arisen within the last few years. Before that, it was traditional publishing and doing that route, or paying for it yourself, the self-publishing route. Now, this is kind of a mix between the two. And we're going to kind of dive into what that looks like, the benefits of doing that, some of the cons that come with that. And if you guys have any questions, as always, make sure to go and check out the comments and drop them in the chat as we are taking questions during the live stream. And if you're catching up on this afterwards, down below in the comments, we answer down there too. So just know that we love you guys. So why crowdfund your book? There are some people who are like, well, crowdfunding is the lazy author way to publish a book, because, you know, if you were a real author, you would, you know, go out and work the grind of trying to get an agent and do all that kind of stuff, or you would just pay for it yourself, you lazy bum, and get the book published and out there, and then people can buy your book. You know, why crowdfund your book? There's actually quite a few reasons why I think crowdfunding is a wonderful way to actually publish your book nowadays. And Vincent and I are going to be talking a little bit about that and talking about his experience with publishing the crowdfunding way through New Degree Press. So kind of first and foremost is that you get a built-in audience and reviews for your book. Now, that is an overly simplified version of what it is that we're talking about here tonight, because there are some logistics. You know, you actually have to pick a crowdfunding site, such as Kickstarter or IndieGoGo or GoFundMe, and there's some pros and cons to that. And I'll touch briefly on those here in a minute. And then there is what is my campaign goal? Like, what perks am I offering? Like, you know, like all of these different things. There's a lot of factors that kind of go into that. But the perk of doing the crowdsourcing is that you have people buy into your book before your book is published. And those people in turn become your built-in audience. Now, in some respects, they're not always going to be your wide audience, right? Most of these people are going to be your family, friends, and distant relations, as Bilbo would say. And they're probably never going to want to hear from you again after the crowdfunding is done. But during that first initial crowdfunding, super helpful. Friends, colleagues, all that kind of stuff. And based on the perks, you can really get people excited, and you can turn them from just a backer into your audience, which we'll kind of talk about when we get to Vincent's story. And reviews. Reviews can be difficult. We're also doing some uploads. Today was uploaded how to get book blurbs from celebrities. Also will be mentioned up here in the right-hand corner. You can link to that. And our very own Emily Vanderbilt went into, how to get book blurbs and kind of being very systematic about it. This is a great and very easy way to get book blurbs from your betas, which I did a more in-depth video on that will be coming in the coming month or so. So there's lots of really good opportunities for marketing sound bites, getting feedback from them, and helping them or having them help you pick out your book cover, all that kind of stuff. Like, there's a lot of fun things that you can do. I had people in my most recent campaign back in last July for my illustrated edition. I actually had a perk that allowed people who bought it to get a character inserted into book 2.
It's pretty
Needless
nice.
to say, people were very, very excited about that. And so, like, those are some of the fun things that you can do. And we're going to, again, talk with Vincent and what he did for his campaign to kind of give you guys some ideas, and then break down a little bit of the pros and cons of IndieGoGo, Kickstarter, and stuff like that. The next other big thing is marketing exposure before the publication date. So you're generating this buzz, ideally, if you're actually telling people about it. Like, guys, my book is getting published. Here's the day that, or the month that my book is going to be published. I'm fundraising for it, doing all this kind of stuff. There's marketing and all of that. It's hard to get the marketing exposure and the excitement after a book if you don't have if you're not doing anything beforehand. And this allows you the opportunity to have 6 months, up to a year, depending on how long you're going to do that, to generate that excitement for that next book or for your first book. So that is one of the big perks that I would say that comes with the crowdfunding. And then connecting with readers and the indie author community. I mean, and if you understand who your audience is and you're catering your messaging in the campaign to your audience, that is such a great way to begin to pull readers who have never heard of you. They have no idea what you write. And you're like, hey, shiny thing, new book. And you get to be a part of the process. Are you in? Most of the time, readers are going to be super interested in that, as long as you've been very clear, very explicit about the expectations, what they get, all that kind of stuff. And you get to involve the indie author community. So you can do blog tours, you can do podcast interviews, you can do Instagram lives with other authors who are in the same genre or write very similar things as to what you are writing. And that ultimately allows you to invest in their author journey, in their author community, and their community gets exposed to your stuff, which is absolutely fantastic. So those are kind of some of the very big concepts that we're talking about with why you should crowdfund your book. Typically, and this is more as a overall, more of a set of guidelines and actual rules, is that it allows you to retain the creative control to your book without the cost becoming an issue as self-publishing would. So it is that nice in between. A lot of people will use the term hybrid model because it's kind of a hybrid of the two. Now, New Degree Press, where we work as author coaches outside of the Manuscripts environment, is a hybrid publisher. So you're doing the crowdfunding to cover the cost of publishing while retaining 100% of the rights and the distributions and all of that stuff to our books. That was one of the big perks. So kind of with that, I want to talk about, Vincent, your experience, and specifically relating to the whole crowdfunding journey, because for many people, that's a very new thing. Now, I've seen authors doing it, and it's been around for, again, several years. But in terms of some of the things that you encountered with it, what did that look like?
Yeah, no, I definitely want to preface this by saying I'm probably a good example for hearing about a crowdfunding experience because I'm not some extreme success story or I don't have some built-in audience from beforehand. I'm pretty much as regular of a success story as you can get out of this experience. I'm somebody who started off the process wanting to tackle traditional publishing before I found this model and that it worked for me. And I think people knew me as somebody who was writing a book, and my immediate connections in life, just in general, friends and family, the type of people who know me or would follow me on my social accounts, that's about as far as my range extended, are those friends and family. I had an Instagram account for friends. I had a Facebook because of college, and then I had a LinkedIn to try and find internships. And that was it. And hearing a crowdfunding model before you launch your book was very foreign to me. And, you hear that. And if you're somebody who doesn't have sales experience or doesn't have fundraising experience, like, what? I have to do that to get my book out there? But upon further research and thought and a lot of time looking into it, it really is very, very helpful for somebody who isn't breaking into traditional publishing because they don't have that built-in audience that makes that more possible or applicable for them, and doesn't want to self-publish because either they, like me, don't have the money, or at the time definitely didn't have the money to put out self-publishing materials on my own and go find my own editor and cover artists and all these other things. It allows for an experience where you get that kind of stuff paid for by the people in your life because they care about you. They want to see your book succeed because they've been hearing about it, maybe in little rumblings, or maybe they haven't heard about it and it's this cool new thing you're presenting to them. But typically with this crowdfunding experience, for most like regular Joes who don't have a built-in audience outside their immediate network, this is for me, only speaking from my experience personally, was a very great way to engage with them because it allowed me to kind of build them up into, okay, they might support me now. Maybe they'll support me when the book comes out. But if they do support me now, that helps even more so. And the overwhelming vast majority of my immediate network who was going to buy the book or was going to help anyway, did it then at the beginning, at the crowdfunding stage. And that's when it impacted the most. And without tapping into the people who wanted to help me, like genuinely people wanting to help you in your life, it's just not as easy to get that book out there without having to use your own money and without having to pour your own resources into it. So I can get into more specifics about my crowdfunding and like the types of strategies I use or how it worked at different phases and all that kind of stuff. But overall, at the start, very skeptical. And as I kept going further into the process, I was like, this is definitely the way that somebody like me is going to get my book out there. There was no real other option in it. It worked great. It worked out. I raised all the money and then some that I needed to, and my book got published.
Yeah. And I'm very, very similar to that for mine. Like I just made my crowdfunding goal. Like, it was just like over the line. And, and it's one of those things where you're like, man, I'm asking for so much money, but it's like, you have to understand like the cost of publishing a book, it does require something. Yeah. And, the opportunity that you're giving to people who love you to invest in the book now versus 8-9 months down the road, like it has more of that punch, like you were saying. So like when it comes to your journey and stuff, when you were initially getting onboarded with New Degree Press, they do it on IndieGoGo. And what were some of the ways that you incentivized people, like, in perk structure, any sort of giveaways or anything like that? Like, how did you make it fun? Because ultimately, like, if there's no buy-in for the fun factor, you're not going to get anybody. So, like, what was your take on that?
My take was trusting the fact that I had limited experience. So my take really truly was to look at what worked for most other people and to try in the best way possible, apply that to myself and develop from there and see what I could apply to me and what I couldn't. So I didn't do anything out there crazy creative in terms of how I raised the money. I would say it was fun, more so in the sense that people were invested in who I was and how maybe I was posting about it by, saying like, oh, happy Earth Day, like with a picture of a moose. And below that being like, oh, you know what else? Like my book, or like a jokey way, like acknowledging the fact, hey, I'm raising money for my book right now. You all know I'm doing that, but here's a moose, sort of. I think that was my more fun engagement with everybody. And I left the perks and the perk structures a little bit more bare bones, a little bit more, okay, this is what's worked before, this is how it applies to my book, because I knew that my immediate audience was not investing in my book necessarily just because they cared about the book itself or historical fiction in general, because it's a niche for sure. It's a niche with people that are interested in that, who are going to be interested in that for that reason. My connections in life do not completely align with that. So my best strategy was not to lean in so heavily to my genre or to the aspects of my story that were engaging to people. It was more the fact, oh, hey, Vince is finally publishing his book. He's been working on it for years. And, let's help this young kid out, get his book out there. We know him, we love him, we want him to do the best. That was what really drove the people who knew me to help, more so than those other strategies. And even if you don't take, like with what you're saying, you had really creative, interesting ways to get people engaged with with getting the book published, right? And mine don't feel as creative or interesting because I'm thinking of it in the context of other authors. But I do want to specify that even providing like bookmarks, which I did, or like a character quiz, like, oh, which character are you most like? Or a discussion guide. Those types of things as perks or add-ons seem very simple. And you, as an author, it's easy to just kind of brush it under the rug as something that's, okay, basic standard, yeah. But for somebody who's not thinking about this all the time and hasn't come across, they see that and they're like, oh, that's kind of fun. Or, oh, maybe I'll pitch it in that way. And to them, that's something new and fun and engaging. Whereas you're not necessarily thinking that way as the person running the crowdfunding experience, right?
That's an excellent point. Like, shoot, I wish I had you to talk to when I was doing mine. But that concept, and this is actually going to get into, or that we'll kind of touch back on that during the, like what works and what doesn't portion of this, is that you have to know who you're pitching this to.
Yeah.
Like, if it's not like your buying audience, like the people who are going to buy your book, like once it's published, like that niche of people. And this is more like, they may not necessarily care about the perks as much as they do just supporting you. And that's the difference between like a backer and an audience member. I think that's such a great point of like, yeah, you don't necessarily need to come up with all of these amazing perks that you're just like, wow, like surely people will love this, when the vast majority of them are going to be like, yeah, but I don't want to do a workshop on writing. Like, I just want to support you. So like, is there a way to just do that? And it's like, then I wrestled with that because I was like, well, obviously they hate me. Like, there's no other logical reason they wouldn't want this amazing perk. But I love that approach. Is you knew your audience and you're like, okay, I'm going to tailor the perks to my audience.
Yeah.
And go from there. And then it makes it a lot easier in terms of like how you reach out to people, because you're not trying to sell them on something that they have no interest in.
Right. No, that's really key. And so much of that is different for every author and every person who's thinking about doing this, regardless of whether or not you're attached to a hybrid publisher or you're self-publishing yourself and you just wanted to do this on your own. You're going to have different needs. You're going to have a different book with different levels of appeal. But I would say for almost every author, the people that you're trying to crowdfund to are some sort of mix of the connections and people in your life and people who might be interested in the book as it's coming out, right? For me, that ratio was very, very heavily skewed towards the connections and people in my life, and very much so a limited number of people who were just there goes, oh, this is cool. What's this? You know, and going beyond that as well, I think that it's easy to think of this as like asking people to back you to get your book published. Like, it's hard to incentivize it for them because you may feel like, oh, they're just paying so this gets published, but they're getting a lot of value out of it too. It's somewhere in the middle, right? They're investing in you to be able to publish, but they are getting a book along with it. So you can't just think of it as, oh, they're pre-ordering a book, because they're not just doing that. They are partially investing in you. And that's why you're going to have to price it a little higher, right? And that's why they're willing to do that for you if they are. But it's a mix of both. So they get some value out of it and they get to support you. And most of the people who are wanting to support you will, if you do a good job outreaching to them, and you'll be able to access your community who wants to help you.
Yep, absolutely. So I think one of the things that we, particularly on our end as coaches, is we've heard from authors, you know, when they're going through the campaign process, they hear, oh my gosh, and I had the initial reaction as well, $39 for a signed copy of the paperback.
Yeah.
And this is a very crucial component to choosing your crowdfunding goal, right? You know, so because you could just be like, hey, I'm self-publishing this and I just want to publish a ebook, you know, I could do the paperback later. But for now, I just want to get the ebook. Well, shoot, the cost just went down. Like, you don't have to fundraise nearly as much.
Yeah.
But if you're going to do signed paperback copies, and this is something that I didn't think about until like way later, and then I appreciated the price point, was you then have to pay for the author copies, which if let's say you have 100 people buy your book and your print cost comes out to $3 a book on the low end, because mine's like near $6 with the size of book that I have. So I mean, like, it starts getting a little spendy. So you have to plan for the printing and the shipping to get to you. Then you have to take into account the shipping cost to everyone else who backed your book, and whether you're doing international, which is then way higher.
Right.
You know, so like, what was your initial reaction when you heard a, you know, $39 price point? And again, we're talking specifically about NDP, one of NDP's price points, specifically because it kind of illustrates the bigger point that we're trying to make about the pricing structure to get you guys thinking about what's going to work for you. So what was your initial reaction, Vincent?
Yeah, I want to say that price point, that $39 for the signed paperback, was by far my most popular one. And it was the featured one. It was the thing that basically got the book published, was that price point and that opportunity for people to back me in that way and get the signed paperback. My initial thought was, oh, that is expensive. I've never paid that much for a book unless it's like a textbook, right? I've never bought a paperback for that much, but I've also never bought a signed paperback before. And I've also never backed an author like this. I had never had that experience on the other end, like the customer end or the supporter end. And I quickly, like within a day or two, kind of rationalized and like, you know what? Yeah, it actually kind of does make sense, right? Because your book has to get made. They have to get that specific book. And you also need to have enough profit margin, so to speak, from the crowdfunding purchase to get the editors and the layout and cover design and all the stuff that you're trying not to pay for by having this crowdfunding experience, because either you don't want to or you can't. So it is a lot of money to do that, and you do have to have that money raised. But I think attaching that higher price point to the signed paperback seemed like it. I knew it would work because the people who wanted to get the book were willing to put a little extra in because they were supporting me as well. It's sort of like the comp. It's like really, yeah, there are other perks attached to it as well. But the two big things that are in that $39 price point, at least that's what New Degree Press's price point is. It'd be different in other places, I'm sure, but that's what it is. They're really getting, yes, the book itself, the signed book itself, right? Which reasonably, if you were to just buy that, that feels more like a $20 purchase, right? And then they're also supporting you. So it's like they're getting that book and they're donating $19, which if somebody's willing to support you, that's not extreme and absurd, because, you know, lots of people donate $50 to something or $60 to, you know, a cause they care about. And in a lot of ways, you are a cause. You are asking people to support you and back you. And it's not a charity per se, because you are giving value back, but there is an aspect of investment and care about you. But I will add one thing that was a worry with the price point is, as a younger person with a lot of friends in college and from high school and stuff who I knew did not have disposable income, I already knew that a lot of my immediate audience or my community would not be backing me.
Yeah.
I knew that I would not be able to get their support in any real way until the book was published. So that was something I immediately knew I had to reckon with. And a lot more of them did support me than I thought, and I'm so grateful for that. But to a certain extent, that was correct.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, something that I've told people, you know, like post publishing, is like I have inventory of my books, and I will sell my signed paperback for $25 a pop, and I've not had a single person even bat an eye. At that price point. My hardcovers I sell for $35 and no one has batted an eye. And so like the buying a $40 book without actually having the book and then trying to sell people, and this comes down to what you were talking about, was you have to know your audience. You know, you should have multiple sets of perks, you know, that should cater to each audience. If someone's just wants the book and that's it, and you're like, okay, they don't want a bookmark, which is an additional cost. They don't want, you know, X, Y, and Z. They live in the same town that I live, so I'm not going to have to account for the shipping. Heck, I can knock $10 off of it, you know, because that's going to cover some of that extra stuff that I would normally have to cover. And that's at your discretion. You know, and so it's things to keep in mind, because like I've seen price points as low as, you know, $25 for a paperback. Now I don't know what the pricing for that author and what they were doing and, you know, all that kind of stuff, but it's just those things. You don't have to price it at $39. You could price it at an even $25. The point is cover your costs. And plan for an oopsie somewhere. Because guess what? I shipped my books out media mail because it's the cheapest way. 4 of them were stolen. Guess who got to cover that cost? This guy. Because I'm not forwarding that to the readers. That wasn't their fault. And I hope the postal service workers enjoyed the book. But yeah, so you want to make sure that you cover your initial cost of editing, layout, graphic, for the cover design, copy editing, all of that kind of stuff, plus taking into consideration the cost for printing a book, then the cost to ship that book to you, the cost to then ship that book out. If you're doing international shipping, it starts at $40, guys. Like most of the time, you're looking at $40. So like you really got to plan and take into account, and there's a reason for higher cost. And you can also do like multiple books plus a book signing, you know, like there's so many things that you can do. We won't get into all of the different types of perks because that would be an entire video in
Separate
and of
video.
itself talking
Yeah.
about that. But yeah, just I love the insights of knowing your audience, knowing that some people are not going to be able to support due to a particular price point. Figuring out ways to make that as accessible as possible for them, like hey, just donate what you can and I'll get you an ebook, because again,
Yeah.
you don't have to ship the ebook,
Right.
There's ways to help people, let them know that, like, hey, you can still support me. Even if I had people that I asked and they were just like, here's $5.
Yep. Yeah.
And I was like, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And like that's all they had to give.
Right.
And that was meaningful, because they were like, yeah, I can't do that. I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, totally understand. And you know what? I sent them a book anyway, because I
Yeah.
got author copies. And that's the other thing. You got to have enough profit. Profit isn't bad.
Right. Definitely not now.
You need the profit on the back end for your author copies.
Yeah.
If you're going to order some, because there's the 100 that you're going to order for, your backers. And then there's like, let's say 20 or 30 copies. It's still going to cost you like you got to have the price point set to where you have enough. Otherwise there's no point, because then you're left with no inventory,
right,
to do a book signing, to do a bazaar, to do a farmer's market, to do some sort of local event and sell those signed copies.
Yeah.
And trust me, when you sell signed copies in person, you make a lot more money than you do selling on Amazon. Let me just say. So Vincent, I know that primarily IndieGoGo is kind of NDP's go-to. And I like NDP's setup. And I know that people have done Kickstarter. And I've done a little bit of research onto the differences between both. But before I dive into that, what was your experience working with IndieGoGo?
Yeah, no, good question, because I thought you were going to ask me what's the difference between Kickstarter and IndieGoGo. I'm like, I'm not the guy to answer that. I've never used Kickstarter. But yeah, IndieGoGo I felt was very easy to use. Slightly less easy to be the customer on, slightly less easy to purchase through, I would say. I think it's easier on the actual, like, my end, managing it, than it would be for buying it. Because I had a couple of different things where somebody's like, it didn't go through, or this or that. But overall, as a whole, the experience was really darn good in getting the books out there. Like, it got the job done. And for the most part, technical experiences, they're pretty quick at answering that. And it's, they want to make their profits too, and they want to actually support the people who are using it. So it, like something like a YouTube platform, basically, they manage it well and it works well. And I would say the personalization aspect is maybe less than some people want. But for me, for people who don't have like web design experience or don't even trust their own inclinations about how to do that, it's really helpful, because they have, sections of text, and you can put a video at the top, and you can get across your message in a way that's easy for you to get it across if you don't have that kind of experience. But for somebody who maybe does have that kind of experience and is wanting more options, maybe they'll find that it's a little bit limiting. I can see where that would be the option. But I for me personally, had a very good experience using it.
Yeah, I didn't run into any issues, thankfully. So like in my reading, the difference between IndieGoGo and Kickstarter, the really big one is that Kickstarter is all or nothing. So like if you don't hit your funding goal, you don't get the money. Now, on the flip side, speaking from the customer perspective, if you order on Kickstarter, it does not charge until the funding is done and the campaign is reached. If it's not reached, then it is simply not pulled or charged to the person's credit card. So there's some pros and cons with that. Even on the one side, you have it where it's like, oh, I'm not getting charged for it right now. So, it's really only if it happens. Yeah, I can deal with that. The problem is that if it's like 3 months down the road, or even say, let's just say like a month down the road, and suddenly you're looking through your, statement and you're like, the frick is this doing here? Like, I never did that, because we all forget. And all of a sudden that person now lost several people because they're like, yeah, I don't remember the statement, it looks fraudulent.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of the downsides.
Yeah.
But the upside is that the fee that you pay is a little bit less than IndieGoGo. Like, IndieGoGo does a 5% fee. I don't recall offhand what Kickstarter's was, but I remember it was below that 5%. And so, like, for IndieGoGo, they have both a fixed, which is what Kickstarter is, and then they have flexible. So flexible is basically what we all did, which is, if you don't hit your funding amount, you still get those funds and you can still put them towards the cost of publishing. You'll just have to do another fundraiser to finish the publishing cost.
Yeah.
So that's one of the pluses. Plus, you can also do add-ons and secret perks, which you cannot do on Kickstarter. That's huge. What you see and what you get. And honestly, the secret perks and the add-ons, that is where if you have a lower price point and you're basically doing the fast food model, like, well, for 50 cents you could get a medium size, and it was like, oh, for another $5 I can get a bookmark. Oh shoot, and I can get some character cards for another 10. Suddenly they've added on another $20 versus the one thing that was $20 more. Like, you've provided additional value. That to me is huge. And why, even though IndieGoGo has a higher fee percentage, and there are some, irritations with some of the user, it's not as user friendly for people buying necessarily. Like, IndieGoGo's got like hey, you want to leave a tip? That tip does not go to the author or the person fundraising. That goes to IndieGoGo.
Right.
Which is very confusing for people. And I myself was extremely confused when I tried to back it, because I was like, man, I don't remember a tip being here. Like, that's weird. Like, I want to help them, but like, and then I didn't do it because I didn't have the funds. And I was like, I'm glad I didn't. Like, screw IndieGoGo. Like, I'm not going to tip you guys money. But yeah, so in terms of like which one I would recommend to people is IndieGoGo. And that is because of the add-on feature and the secret perks feature, so you can make something exclusive for a limited time. And Kickstarter, and there's the flexibility aspect of it. Is that, let's say your goal is $3,000 to cover all the cost, and you raise $2,000. Well, your choice is either you fork out $1,000, or once you've had a little bit of time, you can start up another campaign. We're like, hey guys, we're wrapping this up. This is going to go towards the publishing cost and getting everybody's books and all that kind of stuff. Just need to hit that next 1,000. Sometimes people want to help and they just need that extra paycheck.
Yeah.
Right. Now there's one on here that I didn't officially list. And that's mainly because I haven't tested it. I haven't learned a lot about it yet, but I just recently stumbled across it. Is that Ko-Fi actually has a crowdfunding option as a member, which I thought was pretty cool. And unlike IndieGoGo, they don't take a fee at all. You just straight get the funds. Now, I don't know what's offered with that, but that's something that I want to kind of delve into and do some more research on, because like that's pretty cool. I know there's lots of people who have a Ko-Fi account. So it's like, shoot, if you already have one and you already have an established fan base, why wouldn't you try and do that for your book?
Yeah.
So
They must make their money through advertising then, huh?
yeah, advertising. And I do know that they have like a premium account. I think it's like $10 a month or something like
Okay.
that.
Gotcha.
And then it removes the fees that they take on the front end.
Yeah.
So like to not get a fee, you would need the for crowdfunding specifically, the account payment.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
you're paying for the account, but I mean
Yeah.
you could do that for the length of the campaign and then be done.
Yeah.
So like that's still cheaper in the long run. Now I wanted to kind of dive into, what works and what doesn't. And
Yes.
some of the things that I have seen fairly consistently across the people who have succeeded and who have not hit their crowdfunding goals. Because guess what, guys? People don't hit their crowdfunding goals. It happens
Yeah.
all the time.
It happens.
So the number one reason that I've noticed is readers don't look for books on crowdfunding sites.
No.
Big brain stuff here, people.
Yeah.
They're going to Powell's, they're going to Barnes and Nobles, they're going to Amazon. So the fact that your book is going to be pre-selling on a crowdfunding site is just as foreign to them as you crowdfunding your book is to you.
Yeah.
So think about that for a second.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of one of the downsides to doing the crowdfunding route is because you then have to like educate the people on like, yeah, no, this is actually a legitimate way of publishing my book. It's just different. It's like I'm not pocketing all this money. And honestly, from a reader perspective, if you can like list out like what the funds are going to and you're transparent about it and upfront about the timeline, that goes a long way in helping people versus being like, I need $55,000 and reasons. And there was like, cool story, bro. I'll look for it when it hits the shelves for 99 cents. But Vincent, like for your journey, is this something that you kind of ran into?
Oh yeah. At first, I want to say I love the Oregonian in you mentioning pals first before Amazon and Barnes and Noble. That's right on. But yes, this is something that definitely stuck out, and I think the larger thing here is there is an added effort on the part of being the crowdfunder running it, of education to the people who want to back you. Like lots of people genuinely want to help you and back you. They just don't know that this is the way to do it. And they don't necessarily trust it because they're not familiar with it. So I honestly, for all those thoughts and fears about, maybe they just don't want to help me or they don't want to support me in this. That's true for some people. But for the vast majority of those people that you thought, well, why didn't they help? It's usually because of these sorts of confusions that maybe it's just not clear to them or you're not putting in enough effort to make it clear. I think that to me seems like a huge reason that crowdfunding would fail is a lack of either effort or just a mix of circumstances blocking the message getting across about this being a beneficial way for both you and them to get the book published and for them to get copies of the book and what other perks you might be giving them. It's confusing. And part of it too can seem a little like cold and salesy on the surface. It really can because, you hear crowdfunding. Okay, they just want my money. They want my money. They want my money, right? But if you can show your audience and actually explain to them how that money is being used and the fact that this really is what making your book getting published possible if you're going with this method, then most of those people that you're talking to that care about you or about your story or your book, they're gonna want to support you. It's just a huge hurdle to get over on your social media accounts, in person, over the phone, to explain how this works to people.
Yep, absolutely. And one of the things that, you kind of have to prepare them for is because they're not used to crowdfunding a book is that the price is going to be prohibitive to some people. They're going to see that and they're going to immediately want a justification for it. And that's why we put so much emphasis on the price. We were talking about, a $39 price point. Well, my paperbacks are signed for $25. And if someone is going to pay for normal shipping to them, that's not media mail, guess what? That's like an $8 flat rate box. So they're right on the precipice of hitting that $39 price point. And I've had people do that without a question.
Yeah.
So it's not so much once the physical book is there that people aren't willing to drop like $40 on a book.
Yeah.
It is that you have to help them understand a signed copy by itself when this book is published is going to be about $25. And then I'm covering the cost of shipping. So that way you don't have to pay for it. I'm covering it because it's all built in.
Yeah.
Right. It's all built into the price. Plus you're getting exclusive access to the book first.
Right.
You get to vote on the cover, like whatever else you'd kind of detail out there. Like that's big. So that's all playing into that price point. But you need to be able to justify that to them and don't feel bad about it. Don't be like, well, I'm sorry. I had the illustrated edition of my book priced at a minimum of $75. And the majority of the people who backed my book bought that.
Yeah. Wow.
So that, and granted, it's case laminate. So there, it's a higher cost for the book, but that's what I told people. Like it's a hardcover book. It's exclusively hardcover and ebook. And so in order to cover the cost of all that, this is the price. And they're like, okay, they didn't care because I had already done this before. So they already understood what the process was like. So again, know your audience, know what the price is. And that will help when people do find your book on crowdfunding, that they're not going to get this sticker shock coming into it, be like, holy crap, greedy bastard. Why does he want that much? You have that all there. The second big thing that I have seen historically is that authors did no audience building beforehand. Or they didn't test the idea to see if anybody was even remotely interested in that, which is a huge problem. I had an audience, but my audience was for my editing business. That's how I built it. And so suddenly I'm, moving over to this more author-centric social media profile and telling people hey, I have a book now. I had no audience. I write for a niche genre anyway. Christian fantasy is a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche. And so I didn't even have an audience. I just had backers who were primarily family, friends, and some of my Wattpad acquaintances who are awesome. And so, those are some of the things that I struggled with because I was like, man, I thought more people would be. I didn't have an audience. I didn't even test out my ideas. And so, Vincent, what was your experience and that you've seen through some of this?
Yeah, I think a lot of the testing doesn't happen in the way that you'd think, where it's a very measured thing. It's a lot of putting out the idea in the way that you're going to get the answer. Like for me, figuring out that a lot of my friends who are my own age aren't necessarily going to have that disposable income to crowdfund, to support you in crowdfunding, is by saying, hey, how would you feel if you got the book and yada yada to be able to support me, or whatever other perks you're giving them, for $39? And I got to hear a lot of them go, ooh. I got to hear a lot of people say, ooh. And even after explaining and talking to them about it, they were still, oh, okay, I get that. But man, I think I should probably just wait till it's out on Amazon. And okay, if that's the answer, then I know, all right, as a vast majority, that certain section of my community of people who know me and support me may not be able to support me in this way. Maybe they'll just get the ebook, or they'll get the bookmark, or they'll chip $5 in as a donation. Great. But that was something I figured out. Another thing to test beforehand is, I think that's maybe the extent of my testing was that. Now that I'm thinking about it, honestly, I think if there was something I would do is testing out the perks ideas more. I think that in a sense, my campaign already started. My crowdfunding campaign already started, and I had a perk available that was 50 book recommendations from me. And I started writing it immediately, and I was like, oh, this is going to be something that people want. And 2 people bought it. And then I was writing my book recommendations and I got to like 45 and I just thought, I must be too young because I really cannot think of another 5 books that I read and love. Why did I offer this to people? So I immediately took it off as a perk and realized this is not something that I'm necessarily able to give to so many people. And thankfully, the 2 people who bought it, I eventually, did think of 5 more books that I could honestly recommend to them. And I was able to give it to them. But, I didn't want to lean on that so much. So that was early testing, even as it already started. So the nice thing about the campaign, the crowdfunding campaign, is like ours at Nudity Press lasted a month. And it depends for, who you are, how long you want it to last. There are different reasons for all that. But there is, in the early period, you do get to test as you go a little bit, which is nice. I think at least for like the first week, there's a lot of testing and maneuvering that goes on. The perks you set up at the beginning or the ideas that you put out there aren't necessarily going to be the ones that last through the whole campaign. And that's okay. As long as you meet the obligations that you're setting, which is another struggle. Like, for instance, the bookmark was something that I added as a perk, and it was something that's popular, and I was set to get it to people on time, but things change and it's shifting around. I'm still struggling to get that to people, and I'm having to be in constant communication about, hey, look, you guys know me. I'm trying to get this out to you. Really sorry about the struggles that came in getting this. I really appreciate you buying it. Here's a copy of the book. Let me ship that out to you first, even though you didn't order it. Here you go. Or, let me give you a refund along with the bookmark. So it's following through on those obligations, because if people are investing in you and crowdfunding in you, it's not just transactional. And they do care about follow-up and you following through on your word and making some of these things really important and seeing you become a professional in how you do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other things to keep in mind, like for testing ideas, is that, put out a social media post. Be like, hey guys, I'm looking at crowdfunding my book. And, here are some of the perk ideas that I have. Submit yours in the comments below. One, it helps drive social media engagement and it gets people invested into, your book journey. And so, and you're finding out from the people who will hopefully be backing you what it is that they're wanting in order to do that. Now, like for the 4 weeks leading up to my illustrated launch, I had already come up with my perks. I already knew what I was going to do. And so I started posting them, and I saw, based on the engagement of each post, which one was probably going to be the most popular. And it about panned out that way. Now, if going into, when I go to crowdfund book 2, I'm probably going to throw one out there for a week, and as a quiz or, question thing, and be like, hey, what would you guys like to see as a perk, coming for this one? Like, I would love to have like a user submitted perk, and just see what people say, because the worst that they're going to say is that you're an idiot for crowdfunding. And it's like, okay, well, I'll follow back up with you when my book campaign's up.
It worked.
You never know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, like, test out those ideas, see what's interesting to people, and, you never know what you come up with. Number 3 that I noticed is that they launched to the wrong audience. You're trying to pitch it to the wrong people. And this goes back to what Vincent was saying about knowing, okay, the bulk of the people who would support me at the drop of a hat will not be able to financially afford this. So I have to change the pitch for some of these perks. I didn't do that. I was trying to hardcore sell people on the fact that they get to be beta readers, and not realizing that no one cared. Not a soul cared about beta reading. There was maybe 3 that kind of percolated up to the top, but other than that, no one else cared to beta read it. And that was my whole spiel, was that you get to beta read the book and you get to be the first one. They're like,
okay.
I'm like, what more? My soul too. So you're launching to the wrong audience, and like, you guys will see me make this joke constantly, and I am unashamed about it. As a gritty Christian fantasy author, me pitching to Amish romance readers, not gonna fly well. Not gonna get anything going on. And if you're writing sweet, warm, fuzzy, feely romance, I don't recommend trying to pitch it to a horror group. Like, it's just probably not going to work. I know there's a lot of cross genre, but it's not that cross.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, like, any advice from you, Vincent, on like, how do you figure out who your audience is to avoid launching to the wrong audience?
Yes, okay. So the types of audience mistakes that you're playing into are very, large scale for the whole book entirely, because that's a problem with who the audience for your book even is in general, right? And that plays into a lot even after you publish. I think the mistake I noticed, and thankfully one that I didn't make, I'm glad I didn't make this in my crowdfunding campaign. This is something I believe I did very right, was not mistaking the audience, the correct audience for your book when you do publish, for the same audience that you're crowdfunding to. I think that's the easiest mistake to make, because they are entirely different audiences. And for me personally, the audience, the overall sustaining, lasting audience for my book are people who are interested in history, educational institutions who might want to use the book for English classes or for discussion of history topics. And that's my niche. That's my audience. That's who I need to lead into, talking to bookstores and having that be used as well in schools. That's it. That is not who I was crowdfunding to, because the time within a month it would have taken for me to get that same support for that audience was unreasonable. And it was not who I had direct access to. And I'm still getting that direct access to them even now, post-publishing. That's who I'm focusing on. My audience for crowdfunding was my immediate community of people who cared a lot more about me than they did about my book, or cared a lot more about the fact that I was writing a book rather than the book I was writing.
Yeah.
So if I was pitching to them, like I said earlier, I made a lot of history-focused perks, or for instance, my character quiz perk didn't really do well because people weren't there for that. They just weren't. And I think if I leaned too heavily into that, the crowdfunding might have failed. It might have. But I think that's a mistake I would say to avoid. Really write out, like even on the page, write out who is the audience for your book. Get that figured out. Great, because you don't want to mess that up. You don't want to pitch your history book to the fantasy crowd, unless there's crossover.
Yep.
But really write out entirely separate audience for your crowdfunding campaign and know who it is accurately.
Yeah, 100%. Number 4 is you don't get enough volume on. You don't get enough eyes on your campaign. Like, this is one of the key concepts, is that you really have to get people going. And so ideally what you should be doing, which I don't think a lot of authors do, they're just kind of like, hey, I built a crowdfunding campaign. You should come crowdfund my campaign with me. And everyone's like, okay. T-minus forgotten 3 seconds. Is you want to build a list of people, knowing that a fraction of them are probably going to actually pull through and commit. So ideally, you want to just go through your friends lists, and it doesn't matter whether you think that they're going to do it or not. You're just compiling a list, right? Just start with that. Be like, can they read? Yes. Perfect. They go on the list. Are they of the age range that I am aiming for?
Yeah.
Yes. Put them on the list. Are they broke college students? Yes. Don't put them on the list.
Or make a separate list for that one.
Yeah, exactly. Make a separate list, because actually that'll play into number 5 here.
Oh, yeah.
But if you create that list, that gives you an idea, because this is the thing, more people than you think that you actually do.
True.
Granted, in the age of social media, it's very tertiary. It is very kind of like at arm's length for most people.
Yeah.
Which is pros and cons, right? But you want to make a list of all the people that you're going to reach out to, and then give them some options.
Yes.
This is me thinking later after the fact, like, man, I just went for the hard sell on buy my book, back my book, do that thing. Whereas if I had been more thoughtful about it, I would have been like, hey, here's the 3 options that you can do to help support me. A, you pre-order my book, which is just thank you for your time and effort and money that went into purchasing that book. Because I realized $39 price point, that is probably like an hour and a half worth of work for most people.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. So,
if not more.
Yeah, if not more. So you want to, take that into consideration and be extremely grateful that they're giving you anything of their hard-earned money. B, being like, hey, would you tell other people about it? Like, I'll give you exactly what you need. Like, would you just mind like posting about it and like, or maybe sharing it directly with some friends of yours? Would that be an option? Or, 3, like, I'm doing this giveaway specifically, and I wanted you to be able to have the chance to earn, because you're like, hey, broke college student, actually, well, technically that gets into number 5.
Yeah.
Incentivizing people to share your campaign, right?
Yeah.
So broke college student has no money, but you're like, I want to give you the opportunity to win a signed copy. And which, I mean, honestly, we're probably going to send them a copy anyway, but it helps, right? So they're doing Instagram lives with you on their profile. They're sharing your referral link. They're hosting a blog tour. Like, there's so many ways that you can get people to invest and incentivize them to share your campaign. Now, your backers they've already backed, so they're probably not going to care. It is the people who are like, I financially am on the struggle bus and I can't do that. But like, totally fine. Guess what? I have a way for you to earn a book by help, and it's just helping me out. And you just do X, Y, and Z. And if you're able to do that, like, then when I get my author copies and stuff, I will send you the book. And that incentivizes, because they still want to help.
Yeah.
They just weren't able to do it financially, so they're giving up their time. So like, did you incentivize your campaign at all?
I did. I definitely tried to, especially with the giving different options. I think that's a big way that in it of itself, that's a form of incentivization for your audience, is having different options that give them different things out of backing it. For me, those options were very basically aligned with what a lot of other authors were doing. Ebook, paperback, you can donate smaller amounts. Oh, please share. And I think the sharing, if I could have gone back and redone certain aspects of it, I would have incentivized the actual act of sharing a post or the actual act of sharing their own post about information about, crowdfunding and my campaign in particular. So I didn't do that in particular, but I did try my best to get across the reasons why they were doing certain actions and explain the incentivization that was already there inherently in the campaign. I don't think I did a good job at adding new incentivization in particular, but in a way that almost worked out for my campaign in particular, because the things that were going well were anything that was less gimmicky or had the potential to be less gimmicky was working for me, because they were just there for seeing, me get my book out, kind of.
Right.
And the perks and stuff were more of a distraction for most people. So I think in a sense that might have hurt me to add too many different layers of, here's what you can get out for doing this to help me. For me, that didn't work, but I know for a lot of other authors that really, really does help. So I think everybody's different. I don't know where it would lie, but if I could do it again, I think I would try that out. I think another thing too is knowing that sharing is not just social media sharing. Sharing is word of mouth. And I think for a lot of the crowdfunding thing, it really was the tertiary people who knew a family member of mine and didn't know me really at all. They heard about my campaign through maybe a reshare on Facebook or Instagram, but a lot of times it was just, they were talking and my parent mentioned it or my sister mentioned it, something like that, right? And so I think knowing that as well, and meeting your audience where they're at. This is a little off the topic of incentivization, but back on the topic of the volume of reaching people. There are some people who the best way to reach them is not necessarily the same platform that's working for you, like Instagram. That worked for me really well because most of the people from my age or the people who knew me the best were on Instagram. But there was a certain segment of family friends who I was not accessing at all. I couldn't find their Facebooks, but my parents had a Christmas card list that they sent out Christmas cards to every year. And I said, Mom and Dad, can I have your Christmas card list? And can I send out a Vistaprint card? And I think actually my mom came up with the idea first. I almost took credit for it. Thanks, Mom, for taking it. So, yeah, but I following through with it and actually making and designing a Vistaprint card and sending it out and being an invitation to help support you and the book, instead of a salesy thing. That was something that I wish I had metrics on how well it worked. And I know a lot of people didn't respond to it, but the people that did, that was helpful. And I think that helped with the volume of it reaching more people. Really get creative about how to reach the people who actually genuinely care about you and your book getting out there.
Yep, absolutely. And that goes to, it's not just about who you know, but it's like who other people know as well, to be able to get to that, secondary list of people that you wouldn't normally have contact with, but are like, oh, you're so-and-so's kid. Like, yeah, like I'll help, I'll chip in, for that. Like, why not? Like, I think that's a great way to, look at it, and it's helping invest in something, right?
Yeah, definitely.
That's how you pitch it. It's not this, leveraging relationships.
Yeah.
It is more about just like making that genuine connection with people and just being real, because everybody hates crap. Like, everybody hates it when you're wearing a mask, and no one likes to be sold to.
Nope.
So even the you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, it gets old after a while. If you're like, hey, I just genuinely want to help, and like in the midst of the conversation you're like, yeah, I'm getting my book published and crowdfunding and stuff, I'm like, oh shoot, like that's cool, like what can I do to be a part of that?
Yeah.
And then at that point you're able to have just a very real human conversation with them, which is far more powerful.
100%. I found that it was honestly the best way for me to reconnect with people I wanted to reconnect with anyway. I was finding that, I'm incentivized to talk to them about the campaign, but I really was just thinking, okay, wait, I haven't talked to them in 2 years. And I know they might want to help me, but let me just go catch up with them. Let me just call them or start a text conversation with them or something about this, and just talk to them for a while and really not make it about that, if that's what I'm going to do anyway. Right. Yeah. So that's helpful. I wanted to add something too that was really meaningful in my experience with crowdfunding. I had certain friends who were, broke college students who actually did support in really creative ways. And it really stuck out to me. Like, for instance, to save money, 3 friends of mine, they pooled together and bought a single copy for the 3 of them, so that like the listing read 3 different names in a row. It was like name, comma, and name. And that's who ordered it. And it had some shipping address. They didn't live together, so I don't know how they passed it around, but I thought that was really fun. And then I had another friend who flat out put $35 in the donation box. And I messaged him and I was like, hey, I think you might have meant to order the pre-order paperback. If you want, we can try and get this refunded so that, it's this. And he's like, no, I'm going to be real with you. I'm not interested in your book at all. Like, yeah. I just want to help you publish it. And he's like, I subtracted the shipping costs and I'm just donating the flat fee. I'm like, heck yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks for the honesty.
Yep. I definitely have people like that, and everybody's going to have somebody like that. And like, that's okay. And I think as we close this out here, in terms of like, final thoughts, one of the best things that I can say about my experience with crowdfunding was not just the first time around, but the second time around with the readers who I had accumulated since my first campaign, because those were fans who then went on to buy the fan perks. They weren't necessarily backers. They were fans of the book. And the opportunity to reach them where they're at, because I also had the audiobook coming out at the same time. So it's like, for one perk, you get the signed copy of the illustrated edition, and you got a copy of, the audiobook. And so like there's so many different ways, but it helped me reach people that I never would have reached before. And, when I'm thinking forward to the campaign for book 2, I'm getting character art commission done. And so I'm hoping to have at least 4 or 5 characters done by the time the next crowdfunding goes for the City of Stone and Sorrow. So that way I can add that as like a bookmark add-on or a character card and, add that as a perk, because those are things that people really enjoy. I'm building an entire world setting on World Anvil, and I'll probably have a perk depending on when the release date for that thing will go, because there's so much world building that I'm doing on it. They might get the first access to it before anyone else does when they buy the perk.
That's awesome.
And so not only do they get, book 2, but they get to basically get caught up on everything that's happening within the world. Like those kinds of things are where you can begin to start thinking about, like, what would I want in investing in an author's book? I want access to those behind the scenes. I want character cards. I want book merch. I backed a friend of mine, Angela R. Watts, who we mentioned at the start of the stream. I backed her audio book. I didn't buy the audiobook because I don't have enough time to listen to them. But I got the one where I get the signed copy of book 1 and book 2, plus some character swag. And I'm like, yeah. That's what I'm about.
Early.
Yeah, absolutely. So, figuring out, what do the readers want? What do backers want? What is my initial cost? How can I invest like in the community of people that I am trying to bring into my world? Like, really, that's what the crowdfunding is good for. You can't really do that with the traditional publishing route because they don't let anyone see what you're doing. This, you can literally have a set of betas read the entire novel and give you that feedback from the reader perspective, which is invaluable. You can have them talk with you and help you build your book cover from start to finish. There's so many options that you guys can do that I really think that crowdfunding books is probably like the best route that someone could go when they're like, I want to retain my rights and the distribution of my book and the creative control of my book, but I don't have enough money lying around yet from, money rolling in from your books to be able to cover that cost. So I'm going to meet in the middle ground where I'm still able to do all of that and fund it and get the book out there. And then at some point you can choose to be like, okay, I don't need to crowdfund anymore. But you still could if you wanted to at that point, because it's about, again, it's not about you. If the crowdfunding is about you, you're missing the entire point and everything that we've talked about tonight. Crowdfunding is about the backers. It's about the readers. Yes, it is selfishly getting your book published. Ultimately, that can't happen unless you're giving something to someone. So once you've figured out what that is that you're giving to them, I think you can have a very, very successful campaign. Vincent, final thoughts.
Yeah, what you're giving to them may very well be the satisfaction of supporting and investing in you. Truly. If you've reasoned it out and that's what you're giving them, that's perfectly valid too. But you have a definite point, Stephen, and it doesn't begin there. And that's not the be all end all of it. Like, you can't just think about it in those terms. But coming from the backer perspective, that is something that, at least from my experience, a lot of people really wanted to do, and I imagine really enjoyed doing, and were satisfied when the book came back and they saw it published. And they felt very a part because they were very a part of making that happen. Genuinely, very much so were. And I think if you aren't crowdfunding, maybe that's fine, but you're in a certain sense denying aspects of your community the ability to be a part of your publishing process. I mean, that's pretty big for a lot of people who care about you and want to see it happen. And if it's just, oh, you went through the publishing process on your own. Oh, cool. How'd that turn out? Oh, it's on Amazon. All right, cool. Whereas that same person might really want to invest in your publishing process. And that might be something that's really rewarding and cool for them to do and be able to help out. And one other thing too is crowdfunding does seem like that's a weird thing to do to get your book out there, right? But it's a conversation starter. There are a lot of questions. Some of them are hard questions to answer and obstacles to overcome, but at least gets people talking about it. It's certainly much easier to have a conversation between somebody who's going to support you and that tertiary person they're talking to. That conversation is more likely to happen if there's a lot of questions backed into it. It's like, oh, crowdfunding. Oh, really? Oh, I get to be a part of the publishing process. Oh, cool. And if it's just, your family member talking to somebody else and saying, oh, they put their book out on Amazon. Oh, cool. Okay, I'll check it out. Next topic. I think there's a lot in the interesting aspects of it that really make it work. But the bigger thing too is that sense of community between the people who are backing you and the book that comes out, and feeling like it's a community driven thing, because that's what you're making it. And it's a beautiful thing.
Yep, absolutely. And I think one of the key aspects to, that community is, you put their names in the acknowledgements.
Yes.
Like I know that that's a big part of NDP's process. That was honestly one of the most fun things for me when I was talking with people. Be like, hey, not only are you backing my book, but you're going to be named in the book and thanked for doing that. And people are like, oh, because you don't see that. Usually it's like, to my wife, to my kids, to my mom and dad, everybody was great.
Right.
But being able to take the time and be like, hey, thank you to all of you who have done this and listed out. One, that just shows readers that's not going to sell a reader on a book, but it's going to be like, dang, man, there's a lot of people who believed in this book. Like, that's cool.
Yeah.
Like maybe I want to be involved in that.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are all our thoughts, guys. Next week, we're going to be talking about the differences between hybrid publishing versus vanity publishing. And honestly, there is a case for both. Now, vanity has a very, very ugly name, and rightfully so, because they screw authors out of so much the vast majority of the time. And I'm one of the biggest haters of vanity presses. They do have a purpose, but if you're wanting to do this long term, like, you're not going to want to do a vanity press, and you're going to want to learn how to avoid that. So we're going to be talking to Brian Bees. He's the head of publishing at New Degree Press, where both Vincent and I work as coaches, and we have both published our books through. And so I'm excited to have him on here in kind of an interview style and ask him some questions about, like, hey, vanity versus hybrid, what's the difference? And also at the end of the month, NDP is, and you guys will probably remember this, NDP is actually opening up their submissions. So if you have any interest in submitting your manuscript and seeing about the crowdfunding model and the hybrid publishing way, then, now might be the opportunity to take that into consideration. Don't take our word for it. Do your own research on it. And as always, we are advocating for you as authors, and we want to make sure that we are providing you with as much educational content to make the best possible decision for the book that you're working on now as we possibly can. So bringing you lots and lots of content. We look forward to seeing you guys next week. Everyone, have a happy Valentine's Day, and we will see you later.
Thank you, everybody.